Thanks for coming. My name's Max. I'm honored to be here and to be a part of the first ZBrush Summit. This is really cool for me. I've been a big fan for a long time, so it's interesting to be folded into the community in a more meaningful way. This is really interesting for me. I like this. So thank you. Thanks for everybody at Pixelogic for having me here and allowing me to share some of the work we've done at Elastic. Elastic has been my home for almost 10 years now. And in that time, I've helped to create an Annecy Award-winning stop-motion style clay mascot for Red Cross, a Clio Award-winning photorealistic spider for Nike, and a scheming bear and his crew of forest animals for Arrowhead. Our studio, including our sister company, Rock, Paper, Scissors, has brought home back-to-back Oscars for editorial for our editors Angus Wall and Kirk Baxter. Angus is one of our owners as well as an Emmy for the main titles of the Game of Thrones. And we're nominated this year for 2 more Emmys for True Detective and Masters of Sex. It's a really exciting place to work, as you can imagine, and it's really great to work with such talented people. But tonight I'm here to talk to you about our recent stark black and white sculptural look at the World Cup's best players for Adidas. So let's play it now. Do we have audio on this?
All in or nothing. It's a battle cry. A call to arms. The only way to live. The only way to play. It fuels them into battle. They step onto the field wearing war paint. Unleashing speed, energy and control. Bearing the marks of those that know there is only one way. Hunt or be hunted. Fear or be feared. Evolve or die. Black or white.
So I'll come back and talk more about Adidas and give you a demo of some of the techniques we used. But first, I'll give you some background about me. My mom will tell you she always knew I was going to be an artist because when she would put me down for naps in my crib, she would have to pry crayons out of my sleeping fingers. Hi, Mom. My mom was an 8th grade English teacher with some creative tendencies, and my dad was a creative director at various ad agencies in Northeast Ohio. Growing up, I was always drawing. I had a knack for thinking in three dimensions, and I would draw in orthographic views before I even knew what they were. And my dad taught me how to use 3-point perspective long before my peers. I used to work with this modeling beeswax a lot when I was young. It smelled great and had all these great colors, and it was translucent. It was just really fun to play with, and I had these cartoon characters that I used to draw all the time, whole cast, and I would make them out of this wax. And I mean, it was completely, like looking back on it now, just in reviewing for this presentation, I was struck by how analogous it was to what I do on a daily basis. I do a lot of concept art at the office, and of course I sculpt it in ZBrush. And it's so one-to-one in that way that you can see the seed of it from my childhood, and it's really fun to see that. But I loved, so I always remember my dad talking about the computer they got at the office, the first computer they got at the office. And what you have to remember was that in advertising, computers were disruptive technology. And there was this really cool feeling of the computer as a valid way of creating art and this kind of slightly renegade disruptive thing that always stuck with me. And when we got a computer shortly after, I took to it really quickly. My dad had brought home software to learn and catch up and get up with all the young guys who were kind of chasing his heels. And I taught myself Illustrator and Photoshop around 13 by reading the manuals cover to cover. And that led to my first freelance work at 13. Consumer 3D programs came out a few years later, and I got my hands on a couple really simple bad ones, but it was good enough for me, and I was hooked. I began interning at my dad's ad agency at 16, and continued at that one and the biggest agency in Akron, Ohio, through college. I studied illustration and animation at Columbus College of Art and Design in Columbus, Ohio, where I graduated summa cum laude with a BFA in Media Studies. I'm going to talk over this, but you'll allow me to play a little background. So I'll just let this play out. Because of my combined interests in advertising, design, illustration, filmmaking, this like weird mix of loves that I had, I came out to LA to pursue visual effects and animation. I found a home right away at Elastic, and I've been there ever since. It was really my first industry job coming out to LA, weirdly. But the studio's changed so much since I started that it really doesn't feel like the same place it was when I began. Elastic has allowed me to wear many hats, and it's the reason I've stayed there for 10 years. I get to paint concept art, design and model characters, do look development, and see things through production as a lead artist. And being involved in all of these aspects is what keeps me inspired. I think I would have a hard time just drilling down and doing one thing, and it's what I love about commercial work, is that every job is different, So I'll let this play for a minute, but I might scrub through because I forgot to start playing this. So there's just some personal illustration work I've done. I've gotten really involved in sketch dailies, and it's been really fun for me to, creative block is always a common thing for artists, and especially when you're doing creative work all day at work, it's hard to go home and try to spark that creativity. So a lot of what you're seeing here is from sketch dailies, as well as some figure drawing stuff from college and things. So that's been really fun for me to like come home and just have a topic and just hit it and be done with something in an hour or two. And it feels like you're doing something. It feels like you're making some kind of progress or some work for yourself. At Elastic, ZBrush is a really key tool for us. It's used most often in character creation in high detail products like shoes for Adidas and Nike, props, food, environments. You'd be surprised how much food we have to do in CG. But it really allows you to do some incredible things. Let me show you one of my personal favorites. This is Arrowhead. Quick note, and then I'll play it. Arrowhead we worked with Nudio Studios to do miniature backgrounds, which was so cool. Nudio does Christopher Nolan's backgrounds for the Dark Knight films and for Inception and all these really beautiful work, to the point where you can't tell they're miniature, obviously. But one of the most meaningful moments of my life was seeing my concept art translated by these like unbelievable craftsmen and artists. And Ian and the guys at Nudio were just so inspirational. To see my lowly concept art get translated by these master craftsmen was just really incredible. And so we captured those in miniature. We sculpted our characters in 3 dimensions, in ZBrush, and then we 3D printed them as stand-ins on set. So we had these different scaled sets, and we had stuffies to frame cameras too and get lighting reference. So here's Arrowhead. There's 5 spots and a making of at the end, so I'll kind of talk through.
Lesson 4. Repeat the phrase, effervescent bubbles tingle your tongue. Now you try.
favorite one. So this was, we usually render in V-Ray lately. At the time we were making our transition from metal ray to V-Ray, and V-Ray just didn't have much in the way of fur rendering at that one slice in time. And we actually started in V-Ray and backed out to metal ray mid-production. Because the way Shaving a Haircut was working with V-Ray. We didn't know enough. There wasn't enough community support to like kind of help back it up. Here are those miniatures I was mentioning, and so it helped to switch back. It was kind of rough mid-production, but it ended up being worth it because at least I'll take predictability over panic any day. So this is some of the concept art I did. You'll see it kind of interspersed. It was me and Chris Sanchez who did the concept art. So that's Chris Sanchez's. We used what at the time was called PhotoFly. I think it's called 123D Catch now, to capture the environments on set. So in lieu of scanning, obviously at the time we didn't have those kind of resources. But in order to get those really organic ground planes and textures to bounce light and all this other stuff, it was really helpful to start capturing our environments that way and give our animators something really quickly to bring into. And then we were able to take that and project it onto better geometry in ZBrush. So of course all those characters were modeled in ZBrush. There you go. It's a really fun series of spots directed by Andy Hall for McCann. Ben & Jerry's, this is a series, we worked with Ben & Jerry's for 3 years, doing a series of spots and print campaigns and all these other things to introduce some different flavors they had. And ZBrush was really crucial for us. Okay, so the basic aesthetic of the spot, let me just play it out and I'll talk over it. The basic aesthetic of the spot was miniature, clearly. Everything is meant to be pouring out of these pints. And so the effect we wanted to go for was kind of train set miniatures. So everything had to be molded and everything had to have big radiuses, relative to the characters, of course. We had a lot of food that we had to create. So we had all these really coffee beans have to look like coffee beans, otherwise they're not appetizing. Caramel has to look like caramel, otherwise it's just plastic, and who wants to eat plastic? So a lot of these things had these molded edges, and the first year we didn't have Dynamesh. I think Dynamesh came out in between the first and second years, so they were 2 at a time each year. So you can see the kind of train set miniature. We shot the hands practically, but everything else is CG. The grass is half practical. We shot some stuff and manipulated it. But most of that, everything else is CG. The food was really interesting. As you can see, there's lots of food. I know I mentioned it, but in this case, the grass is CG in this one. The food was really a challenge. We've got bananas, yogurts, we've got peanuts and everything else. And you'll see in a minute, we've got whole ski slopes full of yogurt. So, a lot of that stuff was very sculptural, and it was important that we get everything looking just right and appetizing, like I said. So, we have strawberries, raspberries, yogurt, everything else. It was a real challenge to get everything else, to get everything looking with the right amount of detail. Like things like the biscuits and everything else, like the shortbread. we found that we had to texture that stuff first and then get the displacement off of that. All the characters, I think we had something like 40 characters all said and done after all the spots that we've done. So this one was for Liz Lemon. This is the end of 30 Rock. They made a flavor for Liz Lemon. So this is a miniature train set scale Tina Fey that I got to sculpt. But like I was saying, we had, all in all, we had 40 characters or something like that, all based on the same topology. And we used ZBrush like a dress-up doll thing. We had tons and tons of layers, blend shapes, displacement, to make all these characters look different. And it got to the point where by the end, if someone was like, we need a new character to fill in another, we're seeing repetition on the ski slopes, can you give us another 2 characters, and you could have them in the same day, rigged and textured and everything. It was really interesting to, you know, it was a hardcore use of ZBrush, really. Like, we could not have done those spots without ZBrush, no question about it. So what we have here is, on Game of Thrones, I can't take personal credit for Game of Thrones. This was our studio and not myself personally. Although I did help solve a couple, like at least one key technical issue that I'm really happy about and that is worth mentioning. Obviously, Game of Thrones has plenty of ZBrush in it, but those are fairly obvious. So we have the tree in Winterfell. We have the astrolabe, clearly relief, right? This is pretty obvious stuff. And you know, you can kind of imagine how that stuff was made. It took some skill, clearly. But what I want to call your attention to are the continents. And what you see here with the terrain is what I think is a really kind of clever solution to a hard problem. If you think about the way that the spot is put together, you maybe haven't thought about this, so forgive me, I'll do a little visual as long as I've got a camera on me. The world, at one point in history, there was one going theory that the world was actually inside out, and then the sun was in the middle. And in this case, our astrolabe was our sun, and the world is actually on the inside of a sphere. And as you can imagine, that creates some difficult problems when you want to cut out continents and do like terrain topology and things like that, and layers. And as you can see in this stuff, it's all like these nice polygonal, kind of like crafty layers. And when you have, you know, that's fine if you're doing it on a flat. You can all imagine how you do that. That's not really worth mentioning. But when you have to do it on the inside of a sphere, you have this really gradual curve that just creates havoc. And so what we actually ended up doing, I helped figure out a solution to, you take a black and white mask or a texture, and you make a mask out of that, mask by intensity or something like that, and you can polygroup and then extrude it. And you just take it on a sphere, you project it on however you need to, and when you polygroup it, you just extrude it off. And it's nice and low poly, you can decimate it if you need to, and it became this really clean solution to a kind of an extraordinarily difficult problem. You know, it's not, the reason I mentioned Game of Thrones, it's awesome, who doesn't love Game of Thrones? But it's, I think, a good example of using ZBrush in an everyday way that's not like the show horse. The terrain's not going to get the glory of Game of Thrones. There's a lot more better, interesting stuff to look at, of course. But I think it's an important thing to mention in the way that we use ZBrush at the office. I'll just let this play out. So pay attention to the terrain, please. Now imagine cutting that out on the inside of a sphere. So you can see the scope of the problem, because there's a lot of terrain. And of course you can see the tree in Winterfell, nicely sculpted by Joe Paniagua. We actually tried 3D printing the tree, and 3D printers don't like trees. So in case you didn't know, and I would expect all of you to know this, but in case you didn't, there are many different versions of these titles, depending on where they go in the show that follows. So you'll go to different locations based on where the characters are actually traveling to on location. So there are many different versions of the show. Every year it comes back and they do another round of them, and it's always beautiful work. I mean, it's so exciting. For the second year, for the second season, the scope got trimmed because they blew their effects budget on that amazing ship sequence. So, you know, like there's still some great work. They made it really, really work, and you can't tell. But man, like it was worth it, wasn't it? I mean, that was an amazing sequence. So, moving on. Let's see. I will show you Nike Spider. Nike Spider was actually my first job as a lead artist. And it was one of the first times I actually got to do a hero character in ZBrush. We'd always done little props and little things. This is going back a few years, by the way, so that's why it was my first job. This was probably 2008 or something like that. So, you know, this was maybe ZBrush 3, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. So what we have here, that's the rendered version. Apologies if anybody is not cool with spiders. Based on a Black Widow, and so this was actually the pattern of the shoe, roughly, that we were advertising at the time for Nike Flywire. It was a new technology they were using at the time, and they wanted a spider web that evoked the essence of the strength and the lightness of spider silk. And so this was so of course textured in ZBrush, the pattern was painted in ZBrush, obviously modeled in ZBrush. Let's play it. And I've got a making of at the end as well. I actually got to comp this one as well. This was actually shot in our director Andy Hall's garden. It was a really small team. It was just a few guys. It was a really fun project because obviously the scope isn't huge, and that allowed us to just go for it. Just to like spend a lot of time and do some really fun detail work and just get that lighting. And there was some like time lapse in the lighting as well in certain spots, and so capturing the light change in that was no small feat. And the spider webs were an interesting challenge. Not ZBrushed, I'm afraid. So they're actually just planes of geometry with locators, with clusters on verts. Pretty simple solution, really, I mean, when you think about it, but it turned out beautifully. It was the planning that was annoying. Just getting something like that to work was a challenge. There you go.
Go ahead. I think they're watching now, Max. Get them on camera. Get Max on camera. Go ahead. Give them one. I
like that. I wasn't.
I like to bring it from Palmdale.
I wasn't getting the impact of that on the live stream, but when you do it live, it's pretty impressive.
Did you actually do it in front of your desk?
Did I what?
Did you do this actually on your desk?
I did, yeah. You couldn't see it, so I didn't get much reaction then, but yeah. Nike Peel was, how am I doing on time? Nike Peel was part of the same campaign, same flywires. This was our first shoe scan, if I'm not mistaken. I can't think of another one one previous to this that we did. So this was really fun for us because we got ZBrush played a really heavy part, and you'll see why in a minute. But we scanned the shoe and then reprojected lots of panels in order to rebuild this shoe and another one. So I'll let this play out. But you can see all those panels would, to get, it's a monstrous problem really, to get the, to get continuity between panels and then break them apart, like really projecting in ZBrush was the only way to do that. Like I don't know how else we would have done that. because we were splitting seams and everything else. And that also allowed us, like with polygroups and things on the edges, to put different textures on those things and kind of give them extra detail and things like that. Inside textures and whatnot. Okay. Newport Beach was a fun one. I'm not going to say too much about this, but I liked this project quite a bit. The Pegasus was a really cool piece for me. ZBrush. This is my first time. Like, this is going back some years, but that was my first time really texturing in ZBrush. I think this was shortly after ZAppLink came out, and so it became a study in getting the most out of that. It's funny, anytime a new feature in ZBrush comes out, it seems perfectly timed to a spot that we have coming out next. So this was the Pegasus. So I actually did all the wood grain first. So underneath that whitewash is full wood grain, and then kind of whitewash with cavity maps, and use the flatten brush to expose like high points that it hit. So like texturing with the flatten brush only hits the peaks of things, so it kind of scrapes across the top and gives you nice pieces, kind of like along the nostril and along the ears and the tops of the ridges of the hair and the wings and things. And you can see down the center spine of the feather, you can just scrape it across that, and it's really just as if you're sanding it down with color. It's pretty cool. The plants were all displacement. Man, if we'd only had Dynamesh to do that stupid logo, that thing was annoying. That would have been made it the simplest thing. At the time, it was a monster. It was horrible. There are a lot of cheats in there. I wouldn't show you the wireframe of that. Okay, so Red Cross. Red Cross is one of my personal favorite spots we've ever done. I did not lead this one, but I did do the concept art for it and character design, and modeled the character. This took top honors at Annecy a couple years back, and it was the pitch was to make kind of an everyman, like a cartoon modern sort of blank slate that you could see yourself in. So we didn't want to fill in too much character, if that makes sense. We didn't want to make it too specific to any one in particular. So he had to be your avatar of caring and of your personal conscience, sort of. And so we kind of hit upon this aesthetic that was really stripped down, really iconic, and was mostly just about silhouette. So this is the concept that kind of led to the spot, which I'll play for you. I've got a sculpt at the end of this as well, so you can see the creation of the character.
Start making lists. Start shopping for stuff. Bring the stuff home. Wrap the stuff. Wonder if it's the right stuff. Get insecure about the stuff. Shop for more stuff. Put stuff in boxes. Put stuff in closets. Put stuff in drawers. Ship stuff. Mail stuff. Give stuff. Get stuff. Is it the stuff we want? Is it the stuff we need? Is it the stuff that matters? This year, let's take a break from all this stuff and give something that means something. Give the gift of hope, help, and compassion to someone who needs it most, whoever they are. redcross.org and make a donation in the name of the people on your list this year.
Yeah, Ted Danson, yeah. So this was the sculpting of the character. I actually did this in one day on vacation. I was, and it was a good thing it was only one day because I didn't want it to come back. I did the concept art of the character, and I think we were awarded the job while I was off in between projects. And we heard we got it, and it was like, time to go. So I sat down at home for a day and knocked this guy out. And I started with a base mesh because I knew that I wasn't going to end up doing the topology since I was handing that off to people at work. So I at least didn't screw them too hard, and I gave them a base mesh that had some place to start anyway. And it helped, you know, like in the case of a simple character like this, I like to start with a really, really simple like box modeled thing because he is kind of boxy, a little bit simple. So it helped me sort of have a place to start and have some planning and have some good topology so I could do polygroups and you know, be able to select down arms and things like that without spirals and silly things. So in this case, it was really nice. Also, let's play a little bit. I was really happy with the hands we got on him. He had to unwrap gifts right in camera. So he had to have these really specific hands that were really friendly, but kind of still big and blocky, not unlike Gumby sort of character, you know, soft and flat, but he still wanted to have a lot of character and not look out of character for such a simple character. You know, you didn't want to like anatomical hands. So everything was kind of bendy and flexy, and it was interesting to work in hard edges to a round character, and I think it worked out pretty nicely. His hair is something I really enjoyed, just from an abstract sort of character design point of view. It was a nice feature to give him something, because he's basically naked with a belt line and a tie, so he needed something, you know. But yeah, like I said, I was really happy with the way like the hand sculpting came out. It's one of I think they're still my favorite CG hands we've done as a studio. They just turned out so beautifully. They were rigged so nicely by Adam Carter. I love bendy arms. Also, I can't get enough of bendy arms, and so I try to put them in every design I do, and they only stick a few times. But in this case, it really made sense to get that clay aesthetic, you know, and try to make sure he felt loose and tactile. So you can start to see I'm going to be getting into the clay a technique any second. There you go. So I just threw a bunch of alphas, like kind of without caring about where they went, because I just kind of wanted to give myself a problem to solve, sort of. I wasn't trying to get it all in one go, but I wanted to sort of like give myself artifacts to fix, as if you were making a character and you had a loose piece of clay and you were honing. So I ended up using the flatten brush a lot and the actual clay brush, because I love that clay brush. Because it really does give you nice flat patches, and I put fingerprints in them just as if you were actually to make them out of clay, and left some transitions a little gnarly, like you can see around his hair. So, you know, really going after it. It's funny, we 3D printed the character after the fact, and the people who 3D printed it actually sanded them down and sanded off all the clay details. Because I'm sure they just look like artifacts to them. So a pretty simple sculpt, but you know, I think the simple ones are sometimes more challenging because there's nowhere to hide, you know. Okay, so that leaves me to Adidas, and Adidas is why you're all here, and that's why we were invited in the first place. And it's actually one of my favorites that we've done lately. I'll play it again so you get to refresh your memory.
All in or nothing. It's about crime. Call to arms. The only way to live. The only way to play. It fuels them into battle. They step onto the field wearing war paint. Unleashing speed, energy and control. Bearing the marks of those that know there is only one way. Hunt or be hunted. Fear or be feared. Evolve or die. Black or white.
So this was also directed by Andy Hall. As you can see, some varied taste. You know, he directed Red Cross, Arrowhead, this, as well as a lot of other things. So I mean, it's a wide range of stuff, as well as Ben & Jerry's and stuff too. So, you know, we range from very like cartoony, simple, to this kind of thing, this sculptural kind of stark serious sort of stuff. And it's really fun to get to do all these different things. And like I said, that's what I love about commercial work. Excuse me, sorry. So, you know, one thing they all have in common is like a sense of tactility, a sense of that you could, hopefully, that you can reach out and touch these things. We wanted the surfaces in Adidas to feel kind of like Giacometti, sort of bronze, rough, but sculptural and clean and aggressive. As you can see, like the aesthetic really pushed us to approach assets in a very unusual way. So I've got a lot of behind the scenes for you, since there's a lot to show. These are the director's boards. These are, this is what Andy pitched. This is his last pitch boards, I think, or some kind of final boards. So these are some of our references. These sort of very sculptural, evocative sort of gestural things. We played on this horse a lot. That sort of like sense of speed. You're going so fast that it sort of falls apart. The skull became a really great touchstone for us as well. We didn't try to hit any one of these aesthetics directly, obviously, but I think we came across with something that, in which you can feel the speed of the players. I mean, these are the world's best players. You wanted to get a sense for their precision and their speed, and just the fact that, like, you never know where they're going. You know, they are this good because they can outmaneuver everybody. So you always wanted to like be one step behind, sort of. So these are the boards. You know, especially when you're looking at references like this, you can imagine, and the number of assets that are involved, and likenesses of players. We've got Jaguars, crowds, 5 different World Cup players who people recognize, like Messi. Everybody knows what Messi looks like, and everybody knows what Suarez looks like now, now that he's in the news. We got Eagles, Aztec warriors, Native Americans, Cobras, so on and so on and so on. So we had all these like sequences. We even had sequences of players and like running and kicking and dodging, and it evolved a lot. But you know, it stayed pretty close. I was looking at these boards for the first time in a while, and it's like it's pretty close, pretty tight. This is my favorite part of the boards. You guys all saw the end, in which we're kind of inside the shoes the whole time, as it turns out, and there's hundreds of props that are just strewn about, and they create the shoes. I love it in the boards. It's just player, fudge, 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 shoes. And we're like, huh, how do we? So everybody was kind of like delaying on that one and sort of dragging their feet, like you know, kind of the last guy in gets to do the end tag. And that actually, I think karma dictated that Andy Hall did the end tag himself. So I think you can. That kind of made me smile. He also did the voiceover, and he's also the fan, Andy Hall is. So he's a triple threat. He's directing and doing his own voiceover and starring in his own spot. And I'll come back and show you that as well. So moving on, concept art. The concept art was obviously the first step from the boards. A little PDF for you. So this was the first piece that we did. That's Lam. In the background is a crowd of people, and you can see just kind of blurry. We'll solve that problem later. But at the time we were using a lot of Kino Flow kind of lights, or like sort of fluorescent lights for people who don't know. But you can see the aesthetic starting to come together. There were lots of revisions along the way, as you might imagine, trying to figure out how far you take this stuff. As you can see, the shoes were a major point of inspiration for that inspired the patterns and the things that we would tie together into the patterns that broke them up. And so on Lam's shoes, you know, I don't remember which ones he had, come to think of it, but they're all these dazzling black and white patterns, and we had we tried different ways of pulling them through. I believe he might have been, he wasn't actually the triangles, but he got a lot of triangles. But this is how that evolved. And
we got a question for Twitter.
Absolutely,
from
please.
You. So Matthew Armato, what kind of topology did you get at the end of your final render? Was it the high-res ZBrush for the commercial?
That's a very good question. It's decimated. It's actually full on.
So you used the ZBrush Decimation Master?
We used Decimation Master. It was the only way we could have gotten any kind of topology out of it. Frankly, you know, we could have used ZRemesher, but it was eating just enough, a little bit too much of our detail. And there was a slight texture to Decimation Master that we actually enjoyed. This was a job in which we really embraced artifacts. Having like happy accidents along the way was actually really kind of fun. It allowed us not to overly clean things, but also you can see it's very gestural, very energetic. You don't want to like overwork a little transition, which we did. But yeah, it was all Decimation Master, and that allowed us to really, that made it possible to do this job, I think, really.
Awesome. Is there a question out there anywhere before we hand it back to him? Keep going? Nope? All right.
Because you can only imagine what
continue on.
Topology would be on those. It would be a nightmare. You can't do displacement on things that don't have usable UVs. Like, where do you even start? So Decimation Master really was a lifesaver on that one. So these were some, so a lot of our poses were inspired by a print campaign, photographic campaign that they did. It was really beautiful work, so we just adapted it and worked with it. And worked with these great extreme poses. That's another shot of Alves that you can see in the spot. So this was, along the way, this was a bit of concept art that was actually a paint over of one of our models. So we actually, we scanned, we cyber scanned, we didn't actually cyber scan the players, but because they weren't available, but we cast our Native American and our Aztec, and I'll show you that in a minute. We cast players. We actually used our color artist at the office. He came in full gear, and we scanned him. We scanned Andy Hall, like I said. He was one of the fans, because Andy, as the couple of Elastic people who are watching this will know, when there's a football match on, you can hear him from across the building. And that's not even a joke. He's screaming. You know exactly when a game is on, even if you didn't know a game was on. So, he was the perfect avatar for our fan. So we played homage to him there. So I'll come back and show you some of that stuff, but this was a paint over to try to figure out the vocabulary with one of our great poses that we had that we sculpted. So we had some variations in here to try to figure out different approaches to tie in the pattern of the shoe. He had this kind of hexagonal pattern, and we were trying to figure out ways to tie that in, and this is what we settled on with kind of this like halftone sort of pattern on his arms and legs, and then sort of called it to mind a little bit in the body here and there, and a little bit on the head.
We got a question here in the audience.
Yes.
Just follow the iPad light.
Sure.
There you go. Got a question here. I'm going to hand him the microphone.
Did you use ZBrush in the concept phase? Like, did you go in and model a character in pose and then just use snake hook and pulled out those strings? Or did you only use painting?
I've got the perfect thing to show you, actually. This was our first workflow test based on some of the concept art. We went through a few versions with snake hook, with a few other things, and we were finding that it was a little hard to control when they would just fly out into space. We kind of needed a little bit more precision and just stay a little bit closer to the surface of the geometry in order to kind of, if you stray too far, you kind of lose the shape. So we were always keeping an eye on silhouette still as much as we could. It obviously fell off a lot, but given the challenges, we still needed it to be recognizable as the players. Even the defenders needed to still be recognizable as humans. So Christian Sanchez put this together. This was the first time we were like, okay, we're onto something here. And I'll show you the technique that we used in a minute. Let's see. So here are the scans we did. Let me jump into ZBrush finally. Oops, not Projection Master. Scans, no. Did that work? So we'll go one at a time. These were done by, the scans were done at Scannable with Travis Renke. He's a Texas-based artist that we love to work with. He's a really, really talented guy, like just really cool, super collaborative, and he came up to meet us in Santa Monica, where we're located. And we used two different scanners, an Artec Eva and an Artec Spider. The EVA is great for like broad capture, like full bodies and things, but it doesn't do great for like high detail faces. As you can see here, it really nailed the body at the perfect resolution for us, but you start to lose a little detail in the face. And frankly, this is a pretty extreme pose. This is our Native American, and he's leaning back on the horse at this moment. So we knew we weren't going to capture his legs, so we just got him from the waist up and tried to get just the gesture, like get as much as we could, knowing that he was going to drift and we were going to lose the scan. So we got as much as we could, and it really paid off, because like just the way his body's twisting is something that's really hard to replicate. And knowing, obviously, you've seen how many assets we had to create, having a solid place to start was just invaluable, and it gave us a serious leg up. So we have a few of these other ones. Apologies for the tighty-whities. So you can see there's some little things that we had to clean up, but otherwise, really clean. The heads are obviously not so much there. We didn't bother capturing the backs because we knew we weren't going to use the backs. We ended up, apologies, we used the technique, we called our technique decimation, not to be confused with decimation master. So if you hear me say it, that's what I mean. When we put all the strips on them, we left off their backs in order to not have so much back geometry. A, it would double our work. B, it just wasn't useful. You wanted a clean silhouette. So we didn't bother capturing the back. So that's why you see some of that going on. Oops. This was our kind of complete A-pose scan that we ended up using for kind of completing the scans. So we actually came back and posed this to fill in the backs of the things that we needed backs for, posing legs for horse riding and stuff like that. This was Paul Iacono, our model for the defenders and players. We actually used this for the players' bodies as well, because like I said, we didn't have access to them, and really you can't scan them in those poses anyway. So we ended up sculpting those bodies from, with this element and modifying them, because while Paul is a handsome man, he's not a World Cup champion. So we had to, bring him up to the level of a world-class athlete. And he became our defenders as well. So you can see he brought in his kit, and I probably shouldn't show you this, but he was wearing Nike gear for our Adidas job. But that's the kind of level of detail you get. That was, I believe, the EVA. No, excuse me, that was the spider that we got, I think. I think that was the EVA. So this is Andy Hall. This is our high detail scan. Like I said, the high detail scanner is really better for like small details like faces and hands and things like that. Not really good for overall coverage or things where someone's not going to be able to hold a pose for very long. So you can see we got a great expression, but we didn't get the rest of the body because he wouldn't be able to hold it, and it was going to take a long time. So we did this. So where he's more relaxed and he's got his hands up. He's actually holding on to C-stands as well, so just to prop him up so he doesn't drift. And that was with the lower res scanner, but it turned out really nicely. Is this lower res? I can't even tell anymore. But either way, perfect amount of detail for us, really turned out beautifully. So let me move on to modeling. So we cleaned up all these models, like I mentioned, filling in backs and posing characters and all these other things. This was from the Lam scene, I believe, I think. No, this is Alves. This is Danny Alves. And you can see this is sort of an early test where we took the scan data and posed it. We actually posed in ZBrush, and we actually created kind of simple rigs. We knew we weren't going to need animation, obviously, but it helped us to get some things in position, and well enough anyway to work on. We knew we were going to sculpt a lot on them. So you can see what happened here is that I showed you that scan, actually. This is kind of based on that scan and of Alves earlier, the photographic one. Or excuse me, not the scan, the photograph of Alves. So this was kind of matched, and you can see, so when we scanned, we put their hands in fists, and we had to splice in open hands and just fix like things to work in the motion of it. But where we didn't need to, we didn't add detail that wasn't there. The wrinkles that we got were great. So, why double up work where you don't have to? And it allows us to kind of focus only on the parts that we needed to focus on, and it gave us a great realistic representation where we skipped. So you can see this is a work in progress around the knee and stuff. There's Andy. Andy cleaned up, and with his face, his high-res face spliced in to the original body. So there was a lot of that, a lot of splicing together scans of different elements. So that's Paul again. This was actually the topology that we ended up using in most cases when we scanned it. This is Z-remessured. His head is a separate piece. We ended up splitting work. It was 3 other artists and me. It was Joseph Paniagua, Christian Sanchez, and Diego Melgar doing the modeling. 2 of them are in the audience, and you can give them a big old, if you wouldn't mind. Yeah, give them a round of applause. Round of applause. I was leading the job, so I wasn't able to spend as much time as I would like modeling. I love doing this kind of stuff, but I wasn't able to. So I took what I could, and I did the faces, I did the likenesses of the players, and so we ended up splitting it off. Those guys would take it off, and just, they killed the poses and all this stuff. Then I came in and worked on the heads. I'll have one of those later for you. We also scanned the shoes. So those turned out really nice. The problem with these shoes is scanners don't like refractive surfaces, and those cleats are clear on the actual shoes. So that's all cleaned up. We actually didn't see the toe in the final thing, so we didn't bother cleaning it up too much. But the cleat, the bottom of this looked like it had been melted off. So the rest, I mean, the scans are beautiful, but it just can't, there's limitations. And so we did what we could, and we cleaned up what we had to. So this one actually took quite a bit of cleanup in certain places, but it did a beautiful job. I mean, what you see here, was actually a black texture on the white, and that's leather on top of it too. There was actually that amount of raised surface. It was pretty cool. So that got us off in a really good direction. Let's see. So let me show you. So along the way, mid-production, we were finding that it helped to have some guidance and some art direction along the way, where we had these great models in pose, and initially we were actually probably overworking them when we started taking them through the process and decimating them. God, all that detail is gone. It replaced with new detail, and I think personally kind of more exciting detail because it was original to us, but all that beautiful sculpting detail on the wrinkles and everything else, unfortunately, just axed because we blew holes all over it. So we have this instead. So we did some paint overs for wardrobe and for, this is our model here, and I did some paint overs of wardrobe with some reference as well to get ideas for planning out the cuts and things. And so what we have here, this is the model, the stage before we finished it in ZBrush. And you can see it's been worked on quite a bit, but it helps to have a plan before you jump in, as anybody can imagine. So we're kind of planning out the major cuts. He had, as you can see, lots of big patterns, black and white patterns on him, so that I tried to keep those areas clean. It's messy. And so this is a good example of trying to match the pattern on the shoe to the player. And you can see how it kind of skates up the shoe and keeps his hands intact, and then starts to bleed his face away. We have, it's a little loose, so at some point it's like, just kind of fill in the rest of the stuff. There's a good amount of improvisation about this, and I didn't want to get too specific to have people tracing really specific stuff. There were places where we wanted to, but it was really more about getting the spirit of the art and getting the flow of the line. We were pulling on references if anybody's familiar with figure drawing, you always start with gestures, and typically Vine charcoal and on newsprint. It's somewhat disposable. It's good for capturing the speed and the direction of a pose and the basic weight and the impression of a pose, but you don't want to over detail because you only have 2 minutes. And we wanted the same kind of feeling with this stuff, so you always want to follow the flow of action. And that's what you can see here. So it's sort of helping plan out the flow of action, and they would fill in as needed. And in this case, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think this was actually a Z app link one where we actually took this as an alpha and cut the surfaces off as a starting point, and that was then so I think for the extremities, that stuff was maybe kept, maybe, and then there was a lot of working into it after the fact, of course, too. So then you'd take the poly paint or whatever information and mask it, cut it out, and I'll show you how to do that later. Native American. Spartan. So you can see, like, in some cases it's just wardrobe, and then we came back in and cut pieces off. So then here's some stills. These are actual production assets. These are decimated in Maya, or and taken into Maya. We added a bunch of like these long, skinny pieces. A lot of those were actually just extruded pieces in Maya. In some cases, just gives a little finer control to get a sweep just in that particular way. Oh, and that's the high-res face that's already had stuff cut off of it too. And there's Paul Yacono's face. And that's what it looks like in the spot. Our Aztec warrior. And you can see how tightly it stays to the concept art. Is really cool, and it turned out beautifully in the spot. That's one of my favorite shots. And that's Andy Hall, all cut up in his glory. Really, that was a hard one because there were so many players, and so I tried to create a process that was. You can see these players over here are decimated really, really low. Almost to the limit. It was like 0.000 something, and just to get that perfect amount of like polygonal detail, just to break them up and to eat some of the detail, because we just had the same people for the crowd, so it was like it helped to just absorb some of that and make them look like a crowd and not just the same guy going like this a bunch. So that's Lam. Close up. So that's the level of detail we got to on the likenesses. So we wanted kind of a simple sort of Greek sculpture level, and probably a couple steps down. I would never compare myself to a Greek sculptor, don't get me wrong. I don't have that kind of hubris. And so then we took this and we actually projected the faces on after the fact, as if they were from a projector with the photographs. So I wasn't getting too deep into the texture because that would only cause registration problems later. We tried a couple different techniques, and we ended up actually just painting them and then making it look like there were lights on their face. That tended to be more successful just because we were having some slight registration problems and it just got around them, so we did some comp magic. Some more of those. That's messy. Panther. I wish we saw more of some of these, because like there's such amazing detail that went into these. Really gorgeous detail, and then it's all gone with depth of field and motion blur, and you see them for a second and they're gone. So we found eventually kind of found a sweet spot of like not overworking, but it was still difficult. That spider might be familiar, and it might have been from a Nike spot.
I've got a couple Twitter questions
Please.
for you, Max. So G3 Zard Studios. Max, how do you balance physical texturing in ZBrush versus painted textures?
Physical textures in ZBrush. In this case, at least in this spot, we considered texturing these characters. Like I said, we didn't have really usable UVs. We decimated the characters, so we didn't, that destroys, or it doesn't, you don't get UVs out of that process, obviously. So we considered texturing it in ZBrush. We ended up landing on Mari and PTEX. To solve that problem. It was kind of a crash course in PTEX for us to get all these markings and to get the faces textured with decimated geometry with holes all over it. Does that answer the question?
I think it does.
Cool.
We're going to go with yes. He can retweet. And then Frederick Tall is asking, what was the time frame for this project?
This one was a very modeling heavy job, as you can tell. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was like 8 weeks front to back, but it was 6 solid weeks of modeling with 3 guys and me jumping in wherever I could. So it was really only 3 full-time modelers. I was probably on it maybe quarter to half the time, just, the way your day sort of gets away from you. Let's see. So let me show you some production assets. Did I show you these already? No.
And if you have a question out here, guys, please raise your hand so I can see you and get the microphone to you.
So you can see this is what these assets look like, which is kind of nuts. One thing I always encouraged was using this skin shader, only because it helps you see your silhouette better, and especially when we're in a black and white world, that always seemed helpful. But you can see like really heavy detail. There's actually evidence in this one. You can see one of the things that I loved about ZBrush on this job is it allowed us to change direction really quickly and adapt to director's notes, my notes. I'm picky, as these guys know. But like filling in holes and trying to get more likenesses. We had some concerns from the agency later on in the process that the likenesses weren't coming through enough. And we closed some holes, and that's where we got more specific with the texturing. And you can see at one point we dynameshed a new piece in to fill a hole. Actually, you can see this one looks almost like it was just dynameshed. Probably not decimated. It looks like it was a good enough resolution. You know, it was really fun to be a bit improvisational, but I'll show you the technique in a few minutes. I'll try to make it quick too, because I'm running out of time. But this guy turned out really nice too. One of the things we kept finding too is decimation can sometimes lead to non-manifold geometry, and we had to just kind of go in and do it the hard way and fix some stuff. But you know, it caused problems taking it into PTEX. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been much of an issue. That's a really cool asset. I'm glad you guys get to see it here because we barely see it in the real thing. As with a lot of these things, you're only on it for a couple seconds. But I love these guys. It sounds silly. I could stare at these assets. These are just so well done for as little as you see this unbelievable model. It's there and gone, and it's so tragic, and it's really, really beautiful. So I'm glad I get to show it to you guys. Look at all the detail in the teeth. Really cool. And in the spot, it's there and gone in like 2 seconds. That's really tragic. You know, it's so easy to look at these and just enjoy them during the day and like throw it to the, you know, into the scene and just be like, that's all we see. And so when you say there's 6 weeks of modeling, the problem with it is you can't really skimp. If it's in the shot, it's in the shot. You know, the shot could be a minute long or it could be 1 second long, and it's the same amount of detail you got to put in these assets. Otherwise, you can tell. And it's sort of tragic, but you know, at least you guys get to appreciate it here. To an appreciative audience who gets how hard these things can be.
You got another question here on Twitter?
Yeah.
So Brandy's asking, what was the first professional project you ever did using ZBrush? Using
ZBrush? Yeah, I think it was a Honda Spot. Yeah, it was a Honda Spot. It was Honda Keyhole. You can look it up. It was directed by Angus Wall. It was probably done in 2005 or 6. It was a snake, and I ran out of polygons. At the time, it just couldn't push around enough polygons for me, and it was a really long snake, and I didn't plan well for the scales, and I kind of ran out of polygons that I could use. But it turned out great. You know, it was one of those things that like I was really struggling. I was trying to do it with bump maps, and I had used it a little bit before then. I'd played with ZBrush, and I enjoyed it, but this was probably 2.5, so this was very early, and it had some limitations it doesn't have now, obviously. So it totally solved the problem, and it did great around the head, and then the body was a little bit low res, not that you could tell. So this is...
We got one in the audience.
Yes.
Got one in the audience. Let me get over there.
I'll show you Andy Hall in his glory.
My iPad flashlight.
So you can see how much we had to cover on this crowd piece.
So here's your question from the audience.
Yes.
But those characters, the viewers, the ones that are decimated, you were talking about the arms, how you needed the exact amount of polygons. They had like a smooth transition. Did you dynamesh them after?
Yes. Oh, sorry, please.
Yeah?
After the decimation?
Yeah, exactly.
Decimation was the last step. That was sending it off to Maya was the last step. So we did use Dynamesh along the way to like mold all the pieces together, and then we Dynameshed at the very end. So let me show you this guy. I'll zoom in on a piece so you can see. The heads were always a separate piece, but all the strips and all the holes and stuff were all Dynameshed together at a very high res in order to get all this stuff together. Because we didn't really need lower resolutions, right? You don't need to be able to step up and down in your flow in this technique. It's sort of, you just glue it all together, polish it, and you're sort of done. I mean, there's more to it than that, clearly, but you get the idea. And I love this one, too. So, if you guys don't have any more questions, I have a little demo for you. Would you like to see how it's done? Okay. I will be happy to take questions during this, so please don't be shy. I'm going to try to keep this interesting, but it's a little bit technical, a little bit annoying, but it's actually not that bad, and I think you'll find that it's pretty doable. So in this case, this is messy. Messy here, this is taking it from one of the raw models. You can see he's already got his likeness put in. In this case, does he have displacement? I guess he doesn't have any more displacement. He does have more resolution than that, but he does not in the model that I grabbed, apparently, without checking. So there's a little bit more, but we didn't really, I didn't work in too much more than this, frankly. Because like I said, you saw how closely you see them, and the texture that we ended up putting on them kind of just, that sealed the deal on the likenesses. So I didn't try to overwork, but of course, it's got to work in 3 dimensions, you know, otherwise it just doesn't work. But I'm actually pretty proud. I love that fleshy neck. You'd be surprised how many World Cup players have really weak chins. All of them, I was surprised. Maybe it's just because they're all tucking their neck down to kick the ball. So this is a really cool gesture. I love this one. This is based on, so in our spot, Messi was chasing with cheetahs, I think, yeah. And he has this great kick right at the end, right into the goal. And he pulls this great pose. We actually took footage from him and grabbed stills to match these poses to. So this is actually Messi's kick specifically, and not just a player. This is actually his specific technique, which was important to us, especially if we're, you know, displaying World Cup players. It's important that we get the pose right. So you can see in this case, our original characters had fists, remember? So we spliced in some hands to get the pose right. Spliced in some shoes, some scanned shoes. And then his head is a separate piece. So in this case, I'm just going to concentrate on the body. I'm going to subdivide it a couple times. Forgive me if I mess this up along the way. It's a little you know, you never know how things are going to go live, but we'll see. So I'm going to subdivide it a couple times. That's about all the resolution we need, because we're going to eat most of that with strips and holes and all this other stuff. The first step for us, I'm going to delete lower subdivisions, because we just don't need them anymore. It's a bit destructive, but in our case, I think it's really kind of fine. So the key in this case was masking out some solid areas to begin. And you saw some of that concept art. I'm not going to make this too complicated because it's really just for the demo. And you don't care about how this really looks, but I'm going to make this good either way. Oops. So in this case, I'm going to turn on backface masking. This is my own custom layout that we developed for this job, just because there's a lot of backface masking. And these tools down here are the ones we used. And we kind of shared and developed this. It was a very collaborative in this case, where if we found a good tool, a good technique, a good this or that, we kind of shared it with the other guys. So in this case, so if you can imagine, maybe I had some concept art you could project. Oops. I'm going to use mask lasso. There you go. And just cut some cool shapes to keep. So what I'm going to mask, I'm going to keep. And you saw a lot of times we're kind of keeping around the chest and the head, keeping around the, I guess backface masking doesn't, oh, there it is, that's why. Let me start that over. Let's see if this works this time. This might be problematic too, I don't know, we'll see. Whatever, it doesn't really matter for us. I'll just try to be a little more careful next time. Good enough for me. Of course, I'd never say that at work. I'd never let someone get away with that. But when it's me, I don't care. So I'm going to try to keep, we tended to keep a bit of leg, just enough, and probably usually in the forward edge of the pose, especially down his leg. This is a really dominant shape, so we tried to keep it, oops. Where did it go? There it is. In our case, you could see like that, do I solve it up anymore? I guess not. We always kept sort of that halftone pattern around the leg. That was the one that was tied into the shoe pattern. In this case, I'm not going to bother with that. You can imagine how you might get a texture painted on a leg. It's really just manual masking, and I'm afraid it's no more glamorous than that. But it just takes time. Frankly, a lot of this technique is just about time. So I'm not going to show you the stuff that you kind of get. I'm going to show you the basics. And the, let's see, focal shift. So if, say, I'll do a little pattern just so you can see it. So you can imagine Messi's pattern was a cheetah pattern, sort of. So I'll do just a little bit of this, whatever. I don't know why it's an S. That's not right. But you get the idea. So nothing too fancy here. It's just enough to get this effect sort of nailed for you guys. But if you were doing this, you'd be more careful. But I've got a bunch of people staring at me, so I'm not going to do it right now. So in this case, I'm going to hide the surrounding areas. So I'm going to go down to visibility, hide PT, and it's going to leave me with that. This was really good for getting approvals and sign-offs on the basic approach, because as you can imagine, this is fairly destructive. This is not the kind of thing you can kind of go back and forth. You can patch, certainly, but who wants to do that? If you can get sign-off now, everybody's life is easier. So we're going to mask and hide the solid areas. Then I'm going to duplicate this. I probably could have done that before I hid that. Hello? There it is. Shoot. OK. There you go. So I'm going to keep both of these on, and I'm going to turn on Ghost, so you can see sort of a visualization of where that stuff goes. And this is actually really cool. This is Christian Sanchez, I think, came up with this. It's just nice to be able to see where your stuff is, and to see how he works, and what pieces you're losing and what pieces you're saying are good enough to lose. So that was cool, and it just gives you a great way of visualizing that. Like I said, I like the skin shader for this stuff. And in our case, it's worth mentioning, it's a little note, but I like to get rid of the gradient because it changed our silhouette relative to its background, top to bottom, so I always insisted on a gray background if I caught them. I feel like it's cleaner, so in this case, it just kind of helps focus your eye a bit. It's a small note, obviously. So I'm going to duplicate the geo again, take that clean one, and duplicate it one more time. And I'm going to start to use and in this case, we're going to deflate this by -1, just enough so it's not noticeable, but that it shows us our ghost, which I think is kind of cool. So you can see what you're keeping and what you're losing. The tool one of the tools that I find myself using most, or these guys find themselves using the most, and me too, I guess too, was Curve Strap Snap. I wish I could tell you where this lives. It's in my dock now, so I don't need to know. But in this case, it just rides along the surface, right? No secret to it, pretty simple. But you don't want a big rectangle in the middle of your stuff. It kind of kills the flow. You know, there's just nothing interesting about that, right? So I'm going to come over to, let's see here. Yeah. Where is it? Sorry, I've got notes. This starts to get technical. So embed settings. Where's my stuff? Brush. Depth. There it is. Excuse me. So about like, you know, somewhere I was using -30. That seems to keep it from inflating the surface too much. You can see that lays pretty flat. You know, it's not really giving you too much. And then I was coming down to stroke and going to curve modifiers, and turning on size. And size activates curve fall off. So you can see it has that great taper to it. And in our case, I was finding something that had a little bit of symmetry to it, felt best. So it never got too skinny, because you still want this to feel practical. And like you could actually sculpt this with scrap metal or whatever it was we were making the stuff out of. So you can see that's a lot more pleasing, and you can actually, you know, you can be more careful with this stuff too, and just really nail this shape however you like. So you can get a little skinnier if you like. It's a lot more sensitive, and it seems to match the concept art better. And since I made the concept art, I know what I like. One of the techniques that we find we liked really a lot was this. Joseph Paniagua came across this, and this was really interesting. I had never seen this technique, but I was really impressed by it. Let's see. Is this guy still visible? Why can't I see him anymore? Huh. That's why I had an extra body turned on. So in this case, you can see your reference for everything. You can turn on, yeah, Ghost seems to work best. And so you can follow the flow. And with Z-remesher guides, you're just putting down curves without, maybe that's dangerous. You're just putting down curves without worrying about the shape of that strap. And in this case, it works really nicely to just like throw a bunch of curves everywhere and kind of not worry about it and not let it slow you down. You can just worry about the line work and supporting that gesture. And you get a nice long line all the way across is really cool. It helps like get a nice curve is always helpful. You always want to try to support those longest lines. Like that is awesome. You know, it just helps give you that strong motion and that the force of that kick. You want to feel that. You want it to feel like it would hurt. You know, if you got in the middle of it, and not the kind of hurt where you like fall down like 10 feet away from a guy either. So with that, you can go back to curve strap snap. And maybe I made too many of these to keep it interesting, but you can hit it and hit 5 to snapshot your curve. And move on and just add a bunch of curves all at once so you don't have to like let it slow you down. Some of those are getting shorter. I'm not sure why. It's probably a stray setting that I didn't notice. But you would be more careful if you weren't on stage. So I think it might be smoothing these a little bit as I go too, but you know, yeah, that one got shorter. There you go. I must have been dragging or something. So, yeah, keep doing that. Anyway, that's the idea. We missed this guy. So I'm hitting 5 to snapshot the curves in between each click. And then you can also still, and because all these are live, you can actually still go back and change the size of these individually, which is great. So you can just keep all this like really interactive and not let it slow you down too much. Or like if you came back later and said, that one needs to be thicker, that one needs to be thinner, it's just right there for you, and you can just hit it all sort of, mostly all at once. You want to keep this in patches. Obviously, there's limitations to how much you can do this safely, but you know, so there's that. Looks like I'm doing pretty good on time, so I'm going to start wrapping this up. Anyway, I'm not going to worry about all of this. So moving on. So I'm going to come back to this guy. I'm going to solo it for now so you can see it. And I'm going to delete the hidden geo. Cool, thanks. Here, I've already deleted the lower res geometry, so I don't really need to worry about that. It'll warn me if I don't delete the, if I have subdivisions, it won't let me modify topology, so I'm going to come back down here. Delete hidden. It doesn't look like anything, but it deleted. And so I'm going to do this with panel loops. And again, like I mentioned earlier, it really does seem like ZBrush comes out with a feature, and we use it on the next job, and it's really exciting. So panel loops, this is my first time really using panel loops, and it turned out really nice. So I'm going to take elevation to -100 so that it goes into the surface rather than out. And I kind of like the basic bevel of it. It's nice to have hard edges because we're going to dynamesh this in a minute, and it tends to soften everything just to a nice degree to make it feel kind of organic. Let's see, I think that's all I need to do. There you go. That could probably be thicker. Let's see if I can do that more. Thickness, thank you. I did not write down my setting for thickness, but that's good enough. It's probably going to be too much. Too much. Bam. Good enough for me. Okay. So that's the last step before we glue all this together. So I'm going to take this guy. This is the full body that we're just going to ditch from here on out. So we have this guy, and I've got to delete the other stuff. So I have polygroups have been made during this process just because. I'm going to hide it, and I'm going to delete the delete hidden again. So all I'm left with now, and I'm going to merge these together. Merge down, and I've still got solo on, so forgive me, but you can see all these came together. All in one piece, and you can see how it starts to really like break up in a cool way. And with a little more time and a little more art direction, this could be really interesting. We're also using curved tubes to get some wires in there as well, but in this case, for the demo, I don't really care. And then, I mean, frankly, it's the same if it's tubes, if it's straps, but that is, you know, the basic technique is still valid. So I've got Dynamesh. I'm going to take this up to 1500. We went pretty high res on these things, but we just want enough softness in it to like blend everything together and kind of feel it molded. So Dynamesh, I'm going to cross my fingers. Oh, clear mask. Is it working? Please work. It's going to take a second because, like I said, it's pretty high res. So it doesn't look like a whole lot, but it appears to have worked. I was a little bit low res on some of these straps because I made them giant right at the end. I wouldn't usually do that. And there's a little bit of polish, takes the edge off, and it molds it all together. And then we just decimated, and that was really all it took. I mean, I can show you decimation if you like, but I'm sure you can figure out with the plugin. I'll do it anyway. I will duplicate this. I'll turn off solo, turn off transparency. So you can see how he works together without his body. And it really, you still see the flow, you still see the action of his line, and you get these really great long lines that accent his shape, the gesture. So I'm going to duplicate this one last time. Solo it so you can see. Pre-process current. This is exciting television. Okay. Okay. Oops, I don't care to save it at this point. And then I'm going to decimate current. Doesn't look like much, but it worked. If you want, I can undo that so you can see the difference. We were probably going anywhere between 20 and 40% decimation, depending on how hero the element was. And then it was PTEX from there on out to solve the no UVs and weird topology problem. That's it.
That got some questions.
Please, I hope so.
Here you go. Here's your first one from the
Go
floor.
for it.
With the decimation measure, did
Yes.
you have to eliminate the subdivision levels before you can decimate it, or does that work with subdivision levels as well?
Decimation creates new topology. So it's going to, it's there, if I'm not mistaken, it's kind of there for 3D printing. It was one of the main uses for it. And I've used it for 3D printing. You're creating brand new geometry. And so what happens, I mean, this is entirely new. So you can see, I duplicated it. And I always do that, by the way, so you can see. So if I didn't like it or I broke it or something happened, I always have that to go back to. Decimation for us was just a way to deliver it to Maya and to get the poly counts down, because you saw how many characters and things we had in that end tag especially. We were up around probably 20 million polygons in Maya. They were all referenced. Might have even been more. I don't know if anybody actually counted. But yeah, so this was just a way of delivering, instead of doing topology and displacement, all that stuff, because you can only imagine what a nightmare that would be, or if it would even be possible. So we just decimated, and you can do this as much as you like. It's that pre-process thing just allows you to hit this button and get quick feedback on the amount of decimation. So you can dial this in as much as you like, and it's non-destructive. It's not like 50% of 50% of 50%. It's 50% or 27% or whatever it is that you're on is based on the original mesh. It was a lifesaver on this job, absolutely.
Yeah, it was originally coded for 3D printing, but a lot of people use it for this purpose now for rendering, things like that.
I use it a lot for topology. When I'm re-topologizing things in Maya, I'll kick out a decimated mesh so I can see all my details in high resolution as well.
Yeah, I like to use it for hard surface too. When I get going, I get like 5, 10 million. I'll just decimate because this hard surface doesn't bend, and now I can create like a huge thing that's all decimated. Instead of being 80 million polygons, it's 100,000.
I like to use it for background elements a lot too, when it's not super important and you just need high detail stuff and you don't care about maps and all this nonsense. We use a lot of Ben and Jerry's as well.
Nice. You got another question here from Ryan from the floor.
Hey, just going back to the brush that you're using that allows you to lay down multiple strokes?
Z-remesher guides.
Really?
So we're just kind of bastardizing the tool, frankly, because it just lays down curves. There may be other tools that allow you to do that, but that seemed to work well for us.
Do you have to stick with that one brush as you're clicking back on it and you're laying down the straps, or can you jump around from different curve brushes?
That's a good question. I do believe you can switch. I think we've switched. I'll check it for you. Yeah, did you hear Joe? Joe came up with this, so Joe knows. Thanks, Joe. So I'm going to snapshot. I'm going to come over to curve tube. Look at that. So you can do whatever you like.
Yeah.
So snapshot, and you can change size and do a nice little wire instead of a giant chess sausage, whatever that would be. I don't know what that is. I don't know what I accidentally made, and it's probably not appropriate.
Or a worm. Or a worm.
Or a worm.
Or a worm.
You're welcome for that. You can use that.
Why do I see this on ZBrush Central now? Like all weekend, it's just worm chests. Yeah. So any other questions out there for anybody?
That's all I got. So if you got them, now's the time.
If you got them? No? All right, well, Max, you're done? Everyone, Max.